Hi. Okay. My name is Brooke Petty, and this is my video response to the Millennial Developmental Goals. So, first off, there was 8 of them, and the first one, eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. So, one of the goals is that was to cut extreme poverty and hunger in half. And by doing that, by measuring that, they would have the proportion of people whose income is less than $1 a day. And as far as their accomplishments, they met that. They almost half of the population lives on less than $1.25 a day. $1.25 a day, and the rate has dropped to 22%. And so this is roughly 700 million people that are no longer considered in extreme poverty. So that goal was met. As far as they also wanted to have the portion of people who suffer from hunger. As far as I see, those two are kind of related. If you're in extreme poverty, you're probably going to be in extreme hunger because you can't afford food. As far as my country, I am from Uruguay. As far as my country, so they have also met this goal in Uruguay. Some of the things they're still struggling with is that inflation is still pretty high right now, and the taxes are they're falling disproportionately. So right now, the people who are already in poverty, the taxes are falling unfairly on them, and so it's kind of hard for them to get out of poverty. But they are making government reforms to change how the taxes fall, as well as to liberalize international trade and the capital markets. So that gives them better access to international trade. So that's a 3.0 type people dealing with people. As far as the workforce, the problem is the workforce is often the people who are in extreme poverty trying to get out. That's a big portion of the workforce. And the problem is those are the people, the workforce tends to be taxed higher, even though often the people with more money aren't considered part of the workforce. What has been changed is the National Food Institute. So as far as the extreme hunger, in my country, Uruguay, they have the National Food Institute, who has been providing food to almost 100,000 people. And this is definitely reducing extreme hunger. There are numerous programs in Uruguay that have started in the past couple of years to kind of combat hunger. And sometimes by helping combat hunger, people who are poor are able to focus their money on other things like getting out of poverty. And so it's kind of interesting. A lot of countries, the way they're going at it to kind of help fix both is if they can fix extreme poverty, that leads to helping the extreme hunger. But in my country, they kind of have done it a little bit backwards. They've focused more on the extreme hunger and helping feed people in that sense. And by doing that, like for example, there's a program that distributes milk at much lower prices to people in poorer areas. and that allows them to save money. And when you can save money and hunger isn't your only focus where all your money goes, and you're able to save up and help get out of poverty. So they've kind of gone about it backwards. And as far as what I found, and the statistics have shown that it's worked. It's one of those processes that it kind of goes around. What goes around comes back around. So it's taking a while. It's not going to happen instantly, even just in a couple years. But one of the effects is also by feeding families better and all these programs to feed the families who are poor. Those kids are going to grow up healthier, and then when they enter the workforce, they'll be able to be more effective because they have healthy bodies and they're not sick and already paying for medical bills because they because of malnutrition. So they don't already have a bunch of medical bills and stuff like that. So that's also pretty effective. So the next goal was achieve universal primary education. So for the goal, it was to ensure by 2015, boys and girls would be able to complete a full course of primary schooling. And they've been looking at enrollment ratios and the proportion of pupils, as well as the literacy rate of 15 to 24-year-olds. Let's see. As far as this goes, my country personally, so my country has actually kind of excelled at this. They've passed laws that require boys and girls to get education and go to primary school. It's a requirement, and the parents can actually get fined if the government finds that a family is only sending the boys to school or isn't sending at least all of their children to primary school, then the family will get fined. And so it's a really good motivation for parents, even if they'd rather have their kids stay home and work. It's a good motivation where if you don't send your kids to school, you're gonna lose money. You're not gonna make money. There have also been reforms, and now primary schooling is essentially free starting from age 3, which is 3 to 5 is their preschool, and then 6 to 14 is their primary school. And they have the common, the rural, and the special. And between that, that is essentially free. Primary school is free, and it's also required. And those two government reforms that have happened in the past couple of years have made all the difference in Uruguay. Not all of the developmental countries have passed similar laws. There are still plenty of countries where one of the main reasons they can't go to school is because they can't afford it, or simply the parents would rather have the kids stay home and earn money. Another thing is what's really common in developmental countries is that the boys tend to get sent to school, but the girls stay home. The parents prioritize their kids' schooling in a kind of an unfair way that I see. But the nice thing about in Uruguay is it's required for boys and girls. So as far as the gender equality aspect, the schooling is essentially equal. You're going to find the very similar ratio from boys to girls in schooling. And in there, even in the more suburban areas of Uruguay, the more populated, there are even times where you'll see more girls in a class than boys, just simply depending on where they live. It's not Like it's almost all boys and there's only a few girls. So Uruguay's done very well on that. The third developmental goal is promote gender equality and empower women. So it kind of just is coming off of what I was just talking about. So as far as Uruguay, they've done really well in the education sector. Not so much in the political and employment, the labor market. They are creating reforms to change that. The biggest problem in my country with gender equality is domestic violence. It's still very common because there is a penal code that was passed in 2006 that criminalized rape and kind of helped lessen, I guess. It led to a decrease in rape reportings in my country. The only problem is that the penal code doesn't affect domestic rape. So if a man rapes his wife, if they're married, technically he, more likely than not, he's not going to get prosecuted. He's going to most likely get away with it. And that's something that Uruguay is going to focus on in the next couple of years, is focusing on changing that and getting that reform. Another thing about gender equality in Uruguay that they're trying to fix is unfair marriage legislation. So I can't talk. Legislation. So it's pretty common in developmental countries that girls can get married. It's the legal age is very low. And in Uruguay it's 12 for girls and 14 for boys. And that is causing a lot of problems. It affects maternal health because there's these girls that are 12, 13, 14 and they're getting pregnant, and then they're too young and their body isn't fully developed, and then it affects the baby, whether birth defects or the baby doesn't survive, which also affects the mother's health and the maternal health, and it's very dangerous for a girl that young or small to be pregnant. And so that's something that, as far as gender equality, that needs to change. So as far as employment, that's something that's improving slowly, and there's definitely work to be done. But Uruguay's done a pretty good job in passing reforms to lead to improvement. So they ratified a convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, and that was back in 2010 or 11, and so that definitely helped outright discrimination against women in the workforce. Another thing is, it used to be a lot lower, that the amount of mothers who earned money. Families with children under the age of 6, it used to be that I don't know the exact percentage, but it was much lower of women were employed, but now it's increased to 60%, which is a lot more than what it used to be. And so it's still not perfect, and there's definitely room for improvement, but it's something Uruguay's been fixing and improving. So there is a program called Gender Equality in the Corporate Management Program, and it's helping empowering women to not only have a say in the political sector and be able to voice their opinions, but it's also helped a lot of women get jobs in the market. There's a lot of women who work in the agricultural sector, because that's huge in Uruguay, but it's often, their contributions often overlooked and they don't get paid as much. but it's a start because it used to be that women wouldn't get paid at all. In 2013, 48% of women that were employed are actually employed outside of the agriculture sector. What's become really popular in Uruguay for the past few years is selling cosmetics and things like that. Women kind of taking on their own businesses and selling things to women, essentially, and that has helped a lot of women get out of poverty and kind of be able to earn money in their family, not just the husband. And that's been pretty effective. So there's a lot of room for improvement, but there have been also some improvements. They're not close to where they used to be. So that's a good thing. The next is reduce child mortality. So they wanted to reduce by 2/3 the under 5 mortality rate of Uruguay, and of the world. And as far as Uruguay is concerned, they haven't met that. They're very close. It's not quite 2/3, but they're close. So Uruguay has, one of the helpful things is actually kids going to primary school has, interesting enough, kind of been linked with helping kids be healthier. And I thought that was kind of interesting because it's even like here, when you send your kids to school, you're sending them into public, and if there's something wrong, if there's abuse at home, whether it's domestic abuse or violence, or it's malnutrition abuse, the kid's not getting enough to eat, when you send them out in public every day, it's something that'll be noticed. And so, interestingly enough, the health of the children under 14 years of age actually increased just as the primary school enrollment requirements increased. And so as kids went to primary school and it was required, the health of kids overall actually increased. And so they're not quite at 2/3 for under 5 child mortality rate, but it is improving, and it was pretty close. Essentially, health is getting better in Uruguay. There's the doctors and the amount of schooling and the range of where they're placed is getting better. One of the overall problems for Uruguay, though, is that a lot of people simply don't know, especially in the rural areas. There's just not enough education, so they simply just don't know how to a better, more efficient and cost-efficient way to help keep their kids healthy. And so that's something that I kind of actually talked about in my I forgot what it's called, micro-learning example. Finding ways to help educate people simply. It kind of made me think of radios today. In the US, there's a lot of radios, like in between songs. Sometimes there's radios that'll have like a little spiel about what the healthiest fruit is and the benefits of these fruits, and how there are some things that we do that we think are fine and are actually hurting us. So that was kind of part of my micro-learning example, is to help educate people, even if it's just for 15 minutes. And that would be one of the topics, is maternal health and child mortality rate, because they often go hand in hand. Because it's oftentimes the healthier the mom is, the healthier the kids will be. And one of the problems is often in Uruguay, women simply don't realize they're pregnant because they just don't know. They don't know the signs. They're not taught what's normal. It's kind of something that you just have to figure out on your own. And so it's very common in Uruguay for the first child to either be born stillborn or there'll be a miscarriage or birth defects because the mom simply doesn't realize she's pregnant until much later. And so she'll do things that she normally does that ends up harming the baby. And it's kind of the same thing with child mortality, trying to educate them, because often it's not out of spite. Oftentimes healthcare, it's simply because they don't know. At least for my country in Uruguay, it's often there's just not enough widespread education about that, about health and how to take better care of your body without spending a lot of money. And that also kind of is with the maternal health. As far as combating HIV and AIDS and malaria and other diseases, so as far as that overall target, the target was to have stopped by 2015 and actually begin to reverse the spread of HIV and AIDS, as well as have reversed the incidence of malaria and other major diseases. Essentially, this target, as far as the fight against malaria and tuberculosis, have shown significant results. So about 3.3 million deaths from malaria were stopped and prevented because of substantial expansion of education and malaria interventions and healthcare, and simply education about the symptoms and how to avoid getting sick. About 90% of those deaths that were prevented, 3 million of them were children under the age of 5. So that's something that's also improved infant mortality rate, is getting rid and helping reverse the spread of some of these major diseases. It's definitely benefited. The infant mortality rate has definitely benefited from that. And so a lot of these diseases are in, so in my country, Uruguay, they don't have, like, malaria and some of these other diseases aren't as widespread as they are in Africa and those kinds of areas. They're present, but they're not as widespread. A bigger problem is HIV and AIDS because of rape and abuse and harassment is much more of a problem in my country than some of the bigger diseases. So that one of the things that Uruguay has done to kind of help with that is simply going around and, again, educating people. So we watched a video in class of a woman that was trying to show a bunch of boys who were playing soccer, trying to show them what condoms were and what they were for, and trying to give them to the guys. And they thought it was weird, but things like that have helped reduce HIV and AIDS and the rate of that. And so things like that are pretty common in Uruguay, of just simply trying to educate them about the dangers of it and what happens when you get it. And so one of the goals, as far as the environmental sustainability, so one of the sub-targets of that, access to better drinking water, has increased for 2.3 million people that did not have access to it before. And for various reasons, sometimes it's just developing a better water system in the area, so people have better access to water that's going through cleaner ways. We watched a TED Talk about a guy that created and designed this water bottle that essentially filtered water much more effectively than most of the filters we do have already. The filter sizes are smaller, so it catches way more of the bacteria. The only problem with that is those water bottles are really expensive. So the trick is trying to figure out things like that and making them cheaper and finding better access to stuff like that without being so expensive. Let's see. And the amount of like good drinking water has like risen in 76% since 1990, and so it's definitely made a huge progress in that direction. Let's see. So as far as along with that, the sanitation. So over 1/4 of the world has gained access to better sanitation since 1990. So they've definitely made a huge progress in that with the environmental sustainability, trying to reverse environmental damage and trying to improve and work back from environmental damage. And so they've made a huge difference in that. The only problem is there's still about 1 billion people that are resorted to open defecation, and so as far as like plumbing and public sanitation, there's still a lot of people that don't have access to anything like that. As far as Uruguay is concerned, Uruguay has fixed a lot of that. Public sanitation is actually not a big problem in Uruguay. Uruguay actually is rated, I think, number 14. They're rated pretty high as far as environmental sustainability. The biggest thing is the only problem that Uruguay seems to have is that there aren't a whole lot of resources where they are. And so the resources they have, they've gotten much better at taking care of, but they still have to pay other countries for resources, and so that's still affecting environmental sustainability in other countries. And so while their country's doing pretty well, then the resources they have to use are hurting other countries, like lumber and such. Let's see. And then the final goal is to develop a global partnership for development. As far as Uruguay, they've done a pretty good job about this. I have to pull up the statistic. Globalization. So Uruguay has, in my opinion, I would say Uruguay has become a 3.0 country. More and more people are dealing with people. They have just under 2 million people who are online, usually with Facebook, but that have access to the world. They're not closed off from the world, which is kind of the first step of global partnership, is just simply gaining access to the world. They have over 100 radio stations, and they have TV stations, and then they have over 100 various newspapers. Some of them are international. And so on a global scale, they reported that 55% were internet users. And so as far as on a individual level, they've done a lot in the way of kind of heading toward global partnership. as far as the country goes, the Uruguay has done a lot in the way of reaching out to countries around them, as well as kind of to the big players such as the US and some European nations. They're not as globalized with all of the countries and everyone in the UN, but they tend to, they've done a lot of partnership with countries around them like Paraguay and Argentina. And the trick is just finding ways, especially through international trade, which will really help poverty in that country. Gaining better access to international trade overall, not just with the countries around them, will definitely help in heading toward better global partnership. This was my kind of take on the developmental goals and my country, and it'll be interesting to see the new developmental goals and how they're changed, and how my country, Uruguay, takes it on and how they change it, and what they'll also continue to do from the goals they've already been given, and see how, make sure they don't stop the efforts they're in the progress of making. And so, yep,